make this really easy and just say ditto to everything Grover just said. So thanks so much for being here in Iowa, Grover. We were on the flight together last night coming out of DC, and I will tell that flight is always that late. Just ask Chuck Grassley. But it really is great to be with all of you today, and I see so many friends out here in the audience. And Walt, thank you. Just a true partner in crime down at our state capitol, and all of the additional responsibilities that you've taken on now as well. And of course, I'd like to thank Matt Everson as well. NFIB, thank you very much for all that you do, and Iowans for Tax Relief for inviting me today. And it really is a treat to have Grover here with us today as well. And I've been able to attend a number of the events that he hosts in Washington, D.C. You've got a great group there. They are wonderful advocates on the Hill and engaging with the different states on so many of these issues. And if you would, let's thank him one more time for coming out. So very much. And earlier this month, President Trump had delivered his State of the Union. How many of you tuned into that? Yeah. So there was a lot of great things that he was able to include in his State of the Union address. And what he really focused on, and I thought it was wonderful, he was really highlighting our strong economy here in the United States. And in large part, the economic boom has been due to what he has been able to work with Congress on, which was passing the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And I know you probably talked a lot about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act so far. We're going to talk a little bit more about it, because I think it's really important that we continue to highlight what that piece of legislation has done, not just across the United States, but specifically right here in Iowa. And this historic legislation, it is going to have a lasting impact. Every year, we are going to see new expansions. We're going to see more people going back to work. We'll continue to work on regulation, as Grover had highlighted as well. But we really did overhaul the burdensome tax system that we have here in the United States of America. And we can do a lot more, and that's where we talk about Tax Cuts 2.0 and what we're able to do there and what we hope to be able to do. So through this, we were able to provide some much needed relief to families by ushering in a more competitive tax code for American businesses. And so many of you have talked to me about that at one point or another over the past couple of years. And we really do have a strong economic agenda right now, and it's not gone unnoticed by the president, by politicians, but our president and what we've been able to accomplish, it really is what he says is relentlessly pro-worker, pro-family, pro-growth, and most of all, pro-American. And since the law passed, the NFIB Small Business Optimism Index, something you're very familiar with, has remained at near record highs, and entrepreneurs are growing their businesses and hiring new workers. And we are keeping stats on all of your businesses. You share that with us. We keep a running list in our office of what you have been able to accomplish with those tax cuts. The economy has added 5 million jobs. 5 million jobs, folks. And to put that into perspective, we've added 4 times as many jobs as the Congressional Budget Office projected prior to tax reform. 4 times as many. That's incredible. And then I've seen the positive effects firsthand right here in Iowa. And again, this is the news that you are sharing with. I'm not making numbers up. You are sharing these numbers with me and with my staff. And across Iowa, 99% of our businesses are small businesses. So the effect is real. On my 99 county tour, yes, I'm continuing with the 99 county tour. Chuck's on what, his 41st year? Okay, this is my 6th. But I've talked to so many employers who are using the tax savings and rolling that back into their small business. They're rewarding their employees with the benefits that they've seen. So one small business owner I talked to used her tax savings to invest in her own business. And what she did, she upgraded her websites and improved her marketing and social media presence, thus growing her business. Another has given directly back to the hardworking employees by awarding each of them a $1,000 bonus. Each of them got a $1,000 bonus plus a 5% wage increase. Yeah, that was just one small business owner. And that's just from the work that we have seen at the federal level. Under Iowa's Governor Kim Reynolds, she continues to work on this with the legislature. So we're really great to see that the folks here in the State House continue to move in a more competitive direction, making Iowa one of the best states to live in and to do business. And in our state, of course, unemployment has hit near record lows. We're hovering, I think, around 2.7%, which is still lower than our nation's average. I think the nation is maybe at a 50-year low at 3.6%. 2.7% unemployment, folks. That's pretty good. And 86% of the tax relief is going to those earning less than $1 million a year. So when you hear the folks on the other side of the aisle saying that these tax cuts were done for the uber wealthy across the United States, and they are the ones that are benefiting, no, folks, 86%. 86% of the tax relief is going to those who earn less than $1 million a year. It's pretty incredible. In fact, 90% of Americans in every income group on average has received a tax cut. Okay, so we need to really push back against some of the talking points from the left about this Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The typical American family of four earning a median income is receiving a $2,100 a year tax cut. And that's hundreds more that each of our families will have to fill their tank with gas, to put more food on the table, to buy shoes for their children before school, whatever it is, they can decide how to spend that money, $2,100. The poverty rate has fallen to a 17-year low. 17-year low under this administration. I am really excited about that. And again, the unemployment rate here in Iowa is very low. So those that want to work, there is opportunity for them here in Iowa. So I am so proud of that, and you can't dispute these facts. The folks on the left are going to try and do it. They're all out on the trail right now. You can't dispute the facts. These are cold, hard numbers. So tax reform is working, and we ought to be working together to continue to build on that success, making the tax cuts permanent. I think we've heard about that. Grover, I think that's something you like. And that's why we're fighting for this in the Senate. And last year I did help put forward the legislation which will make these reforms permanent. We really need that. And so if you haven't noticed though, we do have some colleagues that many of whom are across the aisle who want to take the country in the opposite direction, and that is down the path of socialism. And I think, Grover, that you spoke quite eloquently about this. But we do see so many of those on the left, especially if you look at the presidential candidates, they are talking about this. And Grover is so right. If you look, and I know people stress about this, especially here in Iowa, which one is the more moderate? You know, we've got to figure it. But if you look at their policies, folks, all of the policies are the same. And they're taking us in a very, very bad direction. So their plans, they plan to repeal these tax cuts. Every last one of them. They plan to repeal these tax cuts and instead impose massive tax increases on our job creators and the middle class. And they do that through these sneaking mechanisms like the Green New Deal. That's a tax increase, folks. It's job killing, the initiatives that are wrapped up in that. And then, Medicare for all. That sounds so lovely. Medicare for all. Socialized medicine. Rationed medicine. That's what they're supporting. And then, folks, that's not the right way to go. We need to push back on that. We can't afford to let that happen. We have pro-growth policies. We know that. We've seen the results. Again, these are hard black and white figures. You can't argue them. Businesses are growing. Folks are going back into the workforce. We're excited about that. And wages are rising. And the fastest growth we've seen have been with the folks that earn the least. And so I am really excited about that. We're going to continue to build on those efforts. I think we all can work together on these initiatives. And certainly we want to keep our economy growing, vibrant. We will do that. We have to have those in elected office that actually support those initiatives. I'm proud to be one of those leaders in the United States Senate. Thank you for your support so much. And I know Walt, we have some questions that you would like to ask, and we're going to jump right into those.
Good, thank you.
You.
Yep, our members had some ideas and some questions they wanted to ask you.
Did.
I'm going to start out with one of my own personal ones, being from the Iowa State Legislature. I kind of wondered what your thoughts are, being a former state legislator and now a federal state senator. What's the difference between Iowa legislature and the federal legislature?
About 1,000 miles. And literally and figuratively too, folks. It really is a long way from Des Moines to Washington, D.C. in their thought patterns and how they act. And I've talked about this many times as I'm out and about because people want to know the difference. Coming from the State House here and going to Washington, D.C. And this is one of the most shocking things about Washington, D.C. And coming from a place like Iowa, it was a real wake-up when I got into Washington, D.C. Because in spite of our differences between the parties and the policies here in Iowa, we are all working on the floor, in my case, the floor of the Senate. You know, we don't have big offices in another building somewhere else. We're all there on the floor of the Senate. We're all working on the floor of the Senate. And so I'll use one of the most extreme examples. Joe Bolcom. Joe Bolcom of Iowa City, you know, about as liberal as you come. I think he's pushing on that socialist door as well. It was actually a taxing issue. I wanted to work through Joe Bolcom's committee. It had to go through, I was a minority member in the Senate, and it was a tax issue to benefit rural Americans. And so I saw Joe across the floor there in the Senate. I walked over to him and I said, "Hey Joe, let's go sit on the back bench. We need to talk about this tax bill that I have, tax cut bill, let's put it like that." Anyway, and he was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, we'll go sit down." And I was like, "I really need this to move. It has to go through your committee." And I explained what it did. And because it did involve green energy, tied into the green energy space, he was like, "Oh, okay, well, let's talk about this." So we were able to sit down, and in the course of probably about a 30-minute conversation, he was like, "Okay, Joni, we'll get it on, we'll notice it, and we'll get it through committee." Okay, 30 minutes, great. Now take a look at what we might have to do, whether we're working through the Ways and Means Committee, the Finance Committee, the Banking Committee, fill in whatever committee. If you're trying to work an issue through that committee, you are lucky to be able to get on another senator's calendar maybe 2 or 3 weeks from now. You can talk to them in passing on the floor of the Senate if you want to have a 5-minute conversation with them. But we all have so many appointments out there. I have Iowans coming into my office every day. It'll take that long just to maybe get on a person's calendar and have a 15 to 30-minute conversation with someone. And then, you know, the battle, oh, well, I need to pull my staff in and, you know, work through that. It can take years to get things done at the federal level, where the state is much more nimble. And that's why I think Grover pointed out our states are really those areas where you can develop ideas, put them to the test in short order, and see what really is working for their economies. Whereas at the federal level, it's going to take you years, and it's an idea you don't even know if it's fully going to develop and catch on. So I appreciated working at the state level because it is much more nimble, and you can really talk through some great ideas, bounce ideas back and forth, and do it in short order. I think the government closest to the people is the best form of government.
So not too many back at the bench 30-minute discussions down there.
No, not too many backbench discussions.
Okay, this one's pretty important to all of us here. In the past, you have co-sponsored legislation that would make 2017's federal income tax cuts permanent.
Yep.
Kind of talked about this. Senator Daines from Montana has introduced an important bill that would make that happen, the Main Street Tax Certainty Act. What can small business owners do to advocate for permanency? And will you consider signing on to co-sponsor this bill?
Yes, I would always consider that, of course. And then as far as advocacy, all of you have wonderful advocates, whether it's you contacting me directly, the advocates that you have that will do fly-ins in Washington, D.C. That's always helpful to have those face-to-face conversations. But I would say in Iowa, you don't have to worry so much. You still have to have your voices heard. So reaching out to me, reaching out to Chuck is really important. I think you have our support, and I can't speak for Chuck, but I would guess that Chuck is pretty well on board. But when it comes to the House, having those conversations directly, face-to-face with the members that we have in the House, so whether it is Cindy Axney, whether it's Dave Loebsack, whether it is Abby Finkenauer or Steve King, having those discussions face-to-face, making sure that you're contacting their offices is very important. Okay, in other states, NFIB needs to work through other states. There will be some other bigger challenges in those states. And what I ask of every Iowa group that visits with me is make sure that you are sharing stories. So I would make sure that if you have folks in Massachusetts or in Maine or in Texas, that when they are speaking to their members of Congress, that they are sharing stories. What has this piece of legislation done for small business in those areas? So I love facts and figures. I started my elected career as an auditor. So I love numbers, but what you need to do to connect with other people, share a story, just like I shared with you, how one employer, because of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, he was able to give his employees a $1,000 bonus and a 5% raise. Those stories make a difference. No matter what state you're in, they make a difference. If I went to another legislator and I said, hey, did you know 47% of Iowans XYZ? They're gonna say, why do I care about that? But if you tell a story, they can see that same person living in a community in their home state. Stories make a difference. So that's what I would say for advocacy. And yes, of course, we'll look at the legislation, of course.
I'm going to ask one more question because I know you have me back to get to after this.
County tour.
Yeah. And I want to give people hopefully some time after this to talk to you one-on-one. So healthcare, a pretty big issue that we're dealing with. You and Senator Grassley have both shown leadership on this issue. Are there any other healthcare initiatives that you're focusing on, and do you expect the Senate to consider any healthcare bills during the review of Congress?
Right. So there are a number of avenues that we are approaching that deal with the healthcare space and the overall cost of healthcare. Now, everybody's like, oh, well, Obamacare should have taken care of that. Well, right. Obamacare did not address the cost of healthcare. Obamacare was a health insurance bill, right? It allowed access to health insurance. And I wouldn't even say that it saved anybody money. But what we are trying to tackle now is the actual cost of healthcare. So pharmaceutical drugs, prescription medications, taking a look at that, and then where are the other areas of savings that we can find within healthcare systems. So one of the ways that we can do this is by looking at pharmaceutical drugs. Now, I sit on the Judiciary Committee. What does that have to do with pharmaceutical drugs? Well, our drugs have patents on them, right? So what we have found is that there are pharmaceutical companies that will change their formulary ever so slightly right before their patent expires, put a new patent on it. You can't develop generic drugs. And you know, when you have more forms of a drug out on the market, right, free market, competition, it brings the cost down. So there are a number of those drugs that keep putting patent after patent after patent on their drug and prohibiting competition in the market. Now, we've also found, so we can deal with that in judiciary. So we have been, we've actually passed legislation out of the Judiciary Committee to handle that issue. One of the other areas that we found as we have been looking into this is that another way pharmaceutical companies will limit competition, they will actually pay those that develop generic drugs. They will pay them not to develop generic drugs. It's a payoff. It's a payoff, folks. So we have legislation that would take care of that as well. So that, man, we're finding all kinds of stuff as we're digging into this, and it's pretty exciting. You know, patents maybe not so much, but the actual results that we think we can get from encouraging competition in the market is really exciting. Now, we just have to have support from both parties. So far, it's been bipartisan in judiciary. We'll see when it hits the floor of the Senate, but we're hoping we can move on a number of those issues. But we do have a lot going on in the healthcare space. There's the surprise billing issue that we are trying to tackle. You know, if you have an out-of-network provider like an anesthesiologist that insurance won't pay, then you get slapped with you know, a horrible bill months after the fact that you didn't know was coming. A lot of families have a hard time dealing with that. So there's a lot of things that we are working on in the Senate, and I'm proud to be supportive of all of those efforts. So is Senator Grassley, and hopefully we'll see the results of that here by the end of the summer or fall. We'll keep pushing for it, but it's a big topic, so thank you. And I know I'd like to visit with some folks too before I walk out the door, but I want to thank everybody so much for being engaged and for being so receptive of the number of ideas that we're proposing at the federal level. I would encourage you, as you're out and about and visiting with colleagues, other workers, is make sure that you're pinning elected officials down on where they are on some of these policies. We want to know straight up what they support, what they don't support, as we're moving through this election cycle. I think the results will be pretty telling. So again, thanks so much for coming out today and for being so gracious to me always. I really do appreciate it. Thank you. God bless. Thanks for
We want to give enough time to talk with some of you individually on behalf of